So last week, we're still in Revelation 11. Last week we talked about actually, we didn't talk much about
You weren't feeling good last week.
well, and we talked about it. We read Isaiah 28. We did talk about the measuring rod, because we talked about how in Isaiah 28, precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, that word line upon line is the same thing as that measuring. It's a measuring line. And so we had talked about that last time. But today I'm going to go back over Isaiah 28 again, looking at that measuring line, because we didn't really quite get to where we finished that. But I want to point this out first before we go and read that. How the measuring line and the temple go together. And because Joellen had mentioned she didn't understand the measuring rod or the measuring line, but the truth is, the question is what the temple is. It's not what the rod is, it's what is the temple. What is being measured, right? Because we all come to understand what the rod means is a measurement of truth, is what it is. And that's what we're going to look at in Isaiah 28. But what is being measured in the temple here? And so I want y'all to see that's where we're going to go with this. So we're going to, even though we're looking more at the measuring line, I got one. We're going to look at why it's important to understand this measuring line, how do I want to say it? How it's being measured, the temple's being measured by this measuring line. That's kind of what I want to say. Okay, so let's go back to Isaiah 28. And we had stopped at verse 10, where it says, because remember in Isaiah 28, when we were reading that to begin with, it's about Israel worshiping false gods, and God's going to judge them, right? And so what they say, because in verse 10 where it talks about precept upon precept, line upon line, we look at that as something positive. But in Isaiah 28, it's actually derogatory. Because what they were saying is that God's precepts, precept upon precept, God's precepts are just like everybody else's precepts. They're just kind of making light of God's precepts. Because what God had said was, I gave you this to raise you up. I gave you my precepts so you could be raised up above of this earth. Raised up above the false teachings of the earth. So I gave you mine that's going to raise you up above the false teachings of this earth, or the false teachings even of other gods, is what it is. And they kind of said, they're all the same. Gods, these other gods, and that's what the precept upon precept is. And so, anyway, let's go ahead and read more. And of course, we're going to let Ruth read.
Yes.
Go ahead and start in verse 11.
Indeed, he will speak to his people through stammering lips and a foreign tongue. He who said to them, here is rest, give rest to the weary, and here is repose, but they would not listen. So the word of the Lord to them will be, order on order, order on order, or as yours says, precept on precept. Line on line, line on line, a little here, a little there, that they may go and stumble backward, be broken, snared, and taken captive. Therefore, hear the word of the Lord, O scoffers, who rule this people who are in Jerusalem. Because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we have made a pact. The overwhelming scourge will not reach us when it passes by.
Okay. Hold on right there. So what they're saying there is God says, okay, you've said this, it's going to come back to you. In other words, you've said, God's not really going to do anything to us because we're just and even when it talks about in 15 where it says we've made a covenant with death, and it's not really going to harm us. It's not going to come back on us. We're going to be fine in all this. And you have to remember too, they've also had prophets speaking lies to them, right? Remember in Jeremiah, who was it, the king, that Jeremiah came with the bad word, and the king's like, all these other prophets say good things. You're the only prophet that said anything bad. So we're just not even going to listen to you, Jeremiah, so much so that we're going to put you in prison. I don't want to listen. So this is what God's saying. I'm giving you these things to warn you, and you don't want to listen to them. You just want to listen to all the good stuff from all these false prophets. Fine, go listen to all the good stuff.
Don't we do that today?
Yeah, we kind of do.
Wow.
So anyway, and he's saying, and God says, and this is going to come back to get you, and you're going to be scattered. You're going to be taken into captivity, and you're going to be standing around going, because it talks about rest. Where was it? Talked about
12.
rest and comfort.
12.
In 12, yeah. That they're saying, oh, we just get to sit back and have it easy, and God's like, I want to give you rest. I want to give you comfort, and I'm warning you of these things, and you're not coming into my rest. You're just saying, you'll take what you're going to get from
What's a little hell?
Yeah. So go ahead with 16.
Okay, for the I've got not finished 15.
Oh,
The
finish 15,
overwhelming
sorry.
scourge will not reach us when it passes by, for we have made falsehood our refuge, and we have concealed ourselves with deception.
Yeah, sorry.
There.
I'm going to say this again. Also, this is also talking about Egypt. Remember where they hid from death in Egypt? And they're like, we've already been through all this kind of stuff. So go ahead.
Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a costly cornerstone for the foundation, firmly placed. He who believes in it will not be disturbed. I will make justice the measuring line, and righteousness the level. Then hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters will overflow the secret place.
Okay, so hold on there for me. That's the part where I wanted to get to in verse 17. So what he's saying is that y'all are going by your own precepts. But I'm going to bring my measuring line. Because he says, I will make justice my measuring line, and righteousness the plummet, or the measurement, right? The level. He says, you've got it all mixed up now. You don't even know. You think you know what truth is? This is what he's saying. You think you know what truth is. You've established what you think truth is. But after you've been taken into captivity, after all of these things, I'm going to bring in my measuring line. It's going to be justice. And my righteousness will be your level, your measurement, and all of this. And I really believe this is what's being talked about here. When John's given the measuring rod, God's saying, y'all have thought you've had this measurement of truth here, but I'm going to give you the real measurement. So I just want you to get that picture that there's two different ones here. There's the ones that's kind of been accepted here, and it's got to be, you know what I mean? This has got to be truth. It's kind of like what you said. How many people go around going, well, we have the truth. And what is that movie? You can't handle the truth.
Yeah,
you know?
you can't handle.
And that's kind of what God's saying here. Yeah, you think you have the truth, but it's not my truth. And I'm going to send my truth. So go ahead and read some more.
Your covenant with death will be canceled, and your pact with Sheol will not stand. When the overwhelming scourge passes through, then you become its trampling place.
Okay. Hold on. Yeah, and I wanted you to see that too, because mine says the covenant with death is, because he's talking about that, then this will be broken over you. That covenant, because they've kind of accepted the covenant of death. They know that that's coming over them. But God's saying, I will break this over you. But then he says, and when the overwhelming scourge passes through, then you will be trodden down by it.
So is that the overwhelming scourge? Is that the tribulation?
Yes,
Is
I
that the
believe
what?
that the tribulation, but I also believe it's more than just what's gonna happen at the end times. They've already been experiencing some of this, does that make sense?
Right.
So even at the time, because when we read, when Jesus is talking about in Luke, Luke 21, I thought it was 20. When Jesus is talking about when you see destruction coming upon Israel and those, you know, he kind of goes through that. That's also part of the scourge. Because what you have to realize is when God's talking about the scourge coming on, he's also talking about the attack against God's people from the enemy or demonic forces. Those dark forces that are coming against God's people because of God's chosenness is on. Does that make sense? And remember we talked last week about the angelic beings, or angelic beings is not the right word, the Son of God, that God had placed over nations. Remember we talked about that and how they went against what God wanted and they wanted to be worshipped as God, but they had these people underneath them, these nations underneath them. You know, we talked about that some last time. That's also part of the scourge. Does that make sense? That they have been placed in a place of authority, and God's taking that back, and now they're going to come as an attack against God's people and God for losing what they once had. So that's part of the picture of the scourge that we see too.
Gosh, I feel like I'm going through that right now. Democrats, Republicans, scourge.
Well,
It's kind
you
of
gotta-
mad. They're mad about the power that's been taken away from them. You see how they're responding.
And we see the effect on earth, but it's also coming from that spiritual realm too. What's going on in the spirit is affecting what's going on here on earth. Does that, the
Yes.
physical part of what's going on here on earth. So and that's kind of what I'm getting at with the scourge. Even though we're talking about the scourge that the Israelites are going through, you have to remember this is coming from a spiritual place too. Does that make sense?
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around it, though, that instead of what we're doing here affecting what's going on up there, it's what's going up there that's affecting what's going on down here. And we're running around going, what's going on? And I don't understand why we're having to go through this, and it ends up being what's going on up here, and we just don't have a clue.
That's what Paul said about him.
Yes. Yeah.
He alluded to that about.
Yeah. And Ephesians.
We don't fight
We're not
yet.
fighting against flesh and
Yeah,
blood.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what is it, your covenant with death
Mhm.
and your contract with Sheol?
Mhm.
How did they make those?
Mhm. Okay.
By rejecting God's plan?
Yes. Also, you have to realize too, with Satan, the serpent, where is it? I can't remember. Oh goodness. I don't know if I wrote it. Maybe it'll come to me while I'm talking. I want to say it's in Ezekiel, but it may not be Ezekiel, where it talks about the serpent and oh goodness, that he was created beautiful.
That's Isaiah.
Is it Isaiah? Isaiah, where is it? Yeah, I think you're right, 40 something. Anyway, he's talking about that serpent, talking about how beautiful he was. He was shining and gorgeous. And then he was cast down. And he was cast down to Sheol. And the truth is he was cast down to the grave. He was cast down, he's to the underworld. And so when we read about that covenant with death and with Sheol, the place of the dead is that picture of Satan or the serpent being the ruler over the underworld and over the dead.
So when they believed him, they made a covenant.
Yes. Yeah. They chose to follow him because he also chose. And
Yeah, okay.
and he was made to be more, but his choice, the punishment is to be the ruler over the dead and the underworld. That was his punishment.